All right. So we're going to try to get started and continue to bring in Supriya Nair, and I hope that she'll join us during the panel. To my right is Zhao Chang, who left China in 1989 after the Tiananmen Square protests and bad ending to that event. And he was studying already in the U.S. and went back to join the student movement in 1989, and then had to flee and has been kind of in exile ever since, and is now teaching at University of California, Berkeley, in the journalism school and in the School of Information, and has a news site, the China Digital Times, which is a bilingual site with about 20 full-time and part-time employees, and has access and reaches millions of people inside China. And to his right is Hanna Lubiakova, who's also in exile, having left Belarus for you were illegally trying to seize power. Yes, yeah. Right, and is now living in Vilnius in Lithuania, and I think we'll start with you, Zhao, and these are very different contexts. Obviously, India, Belarus, and China have very different regimes and very different conditions for journalists, and censorship, I'm sure, takes different forms, and we will learn a little bit about that, I hope. And I'm going to be very, very rigid about time, because I would very much like, we have to leave this room at 4:30 exactly, and I would really like to leave 10 minutes at the end for questions. So I will be very disappointed if nobody asks a question. Zhao, let's begin with you and talk about censorship in China, and how you're getting around it, what to do about it, and what effect efforts to resist the censorship are having.
Thank you. Thanks for the organizer, including Project Syndicate, to invite me here. Thanks for everyone. We may gonna meet only once in life. We may meet many times in life, but anyhow, now we're all together. Talking about China and censorship, let me try to say in what capacity I'm speaking to you. I was born in China, 1961. Grew up in China. Through the Cultural Revolution, which anybody study China's history will know that's between 1966 to somewhere 1976. I was 6 years old, so I started to remember everything. Happened to me, happened to my family, happened to my surroundings. And that 10 years under dictatorship, Mao, was the darkest time I can ever remember. I think even in modern human history, in the past century or so, it's one of the darkest time that anybody can remember. Maybe today you go to North Korea or somewhere else can find a clue of how that like. Speaking of censorship, you may say that it was imprint in my childhood, that when I grew up, I remember my family members, they were actually high in the Chinese regime. But during the Cultural Revolution, they were also became the victim of the political chaos and the Mao's political persecution. Even within my family, they hide everything from me. They censor themselves. They cannot, even in a family gathering, in a private gathering, nobody dare to say something true, such as, oh, the Cultural Revolution, the chaos disrupted our family. One person said that, everybody said, shh, absolutely not saying things like this. Within a family private gathering, when I was 10, I remember that. That was not even it. I went to college in China. Until I was 25, I was already a graduate student studying physics in China. And that time, China started open. 1986, I came to the United States as a graduate study in astrophysics. 3 years later, when Tiananmen students' movement happened, protest happened, I went back to Tiananmen, be part of that movement. But we all know the result, the bloodshed, the military crackdown, and many people exiled, including myself. I have never been in China back since. So I was just talking to Hannah. Hannah was born that year, right?
Thanks for revealing my age.
Oh, sorry. This is, I didn't censor myself, sorry. But as a Chinese, since 1989 until now, as China changed tremendously. Even I have not been back to that country, my home country. We all know it became one of the largest economy, well, going to be the largest economy in the world. It's the largest trading partner with Europe. It's the biggest dictatorship of this powerful one in this world. It's probably on its way, most likely, to what I call the digital totalitarianism that control, manipulate, censor people's mind and behavior through technology now and in the coming decades to come. And this is becoming my obsession because my field now, profession, is to study, to research on China's digital censorship. And I have this project, which Jonathan just mentioned, China Digital Times. You can Google it. It's focusing on what's voice is being censored on the Chinese social media. So you can ask me, after 33 years, 34 years left your country, in what capacity you can say anything about it? Well, in the capacity of, I spent about 16 hours a day on Chinese social media. That's what I can speak to you about. What people are saying, what censors are looking at it, and on our website, what I call the user-generated content, meaning the Chinese internet social media users, censor-picked, meaning the Chinese censor identified them as somehow harmful or dangerous or subversive and remove them, and we, meaning my team, curated, identified, validated, and put together, redistribute, and make them re-accessible by millions of people in China. And that's what I do now. So in this capacity, I want to speak about censorship. I'm not going to go on and on. I'm looking forward to questions. But let me say a couple of things. I taught in a School of Journalism at UC Berkeley, and I have to interact with dozens of visiting scholars from Chinese media, Chinese journalists, year after year. Even today in my editorial team, there are several exiled Chinese journalists, including one of the most prominent ones in China. Chinese media had more open times, more liberal times, and more repressive times. Right now, it's a more repressive time. But even repressive time, one message I would like you to take away, the people are people, even the Chinese media people, even the Chinese people working in the official media, under the censorship, under the propaganda, under all the controls. If they have a chance, if they have a space, they will cover the truth. They will write down the fact. And back to 33 years ago at Tiananmen Square, at a time when there was a political vacuum for a few days, people get the impression that they are free expression allowed. Then you see the Chinese journalists working for official newspaper like People's Daily, demonstrating and holding a slogan called, "Don't force us to lie." I can also tell you, as a Chinese, and knows languages, my mother language, Chinese, how much censorship and self-censorship and self-control was built in the political culture, built in the language for thousands and thousands of years, were built in your childhood, not only the political memories, but what your parents told you, what's that? Don't speak freely is the fundamental message you heard, and you're embedded in that society, in the culture. However, speaking freely is also fundamentally a human nature for Chinese, for everybody as well. I'll stop here and looking for questions and elaborate anything, but I'm looking forward to listen to my colleagues from Belarus.
Okay, Hannah, you're up next. Tell us a little bit about your background in your career in Belarus, and when and why you left, and under what circumstances, and what you're doing now.
Career in Belarus is for an independent journalist sounds like oxymoron, it's very rare. Yes, so I left in 2020, right after the elections, when repressions became sort of targeted, and I was recommended to leave the country. At first, I went to Kiev, to Ukraine, and from there I had to sort of move to Vilnius, to Lithuania. And I left because I was, again, quite outspoken, because that's our human nature, as we just learned a moment ago, and also because there was surveillance even before the elections, and I noticed it in regions, because I traveled all across the country. I reported on the election campaign, on torture, on beatings of police, and whatever they were doing to peaceful citizens who just gathered to protest against the regime. So it became clear that at some point I would need to leave, and then this moment came, and basically it was clear that I could not come back. And now I actually wanted to speak not about self-censorship and censorship, because I have some 10 years of experience in journalism, but I never self-censor my work. I don't know why I even accepted the invitation to this panel, but I think it's really sort of important and maybe inspiring to talk about how we've been fighting against censorship and against self-censorship in our country, because for those of you who might be less familiar, we have this dictator, Alexander Lukashenko, who has been in power for 28 years. And he has always tried to build this wall of censorship and self-censorship in Belarus, and he has never been successful. Journalists were abducted, were killed. Of course, there is a culture of fear in Belarus, but this war has always existed, right? We were never welcomed in our country. And there are some colleagues here from Belarus who just fled, like myself in 2021, and I'm sure that they can relate to this. We, in some way, were used to this situation. Of course, 2020, when the revolution came, when we had massive protests in Belarus, the regime got so scared because the regime understood that they actually lost the monopoly over information. The majority of people, not all of a sudden, but still, turned to independent media and bloggers for information. And the regime, again, got so scared because they were not able to, control online media. They were not able to be creative enough to get these people to believe them. And that's why they started to attack journalists physically, to ban independent media, to force people into exile, and so on, like many, many levels where this censorship and where these repressions are happening. But what's important, and what we should, I think, be talking about, because I want to bring good news, not only like this bad news about how, awful the situation is. Of course it is awful, but there is a lot of hope. We have in Belarus an alliance, I would say, of, well, firstly, Telegram, right? That's a great power. Telegram is this social network which is very popular and people use it all the time. The government cannot censor it, cannot control it, so people spread information there massively. We have this organization called InfoPoint that gathers some 20 micro newsrooms, and we have like hundreds of thousands of readership. Many people read us. And if some Telegram channel, one Telegram channel is banned, we immediately switch operations to another channel, and that's how this information has never been banned completely, right? That's how people are able to kind of continue spreading this information. Then we generally, what 2020 showed to us is that there is a real hunger for information from people, and you cannot stop that. You cannot, if somebody wants to get information, they would definitely do it. If people are politicized, if people are interested, they would find a way. The regime blocked more than 100 websites, independent media in Belarus, right? And it's practically, well, not possible to read anything unless you have VPN. And in 2020, when we had these internet shutdowns in Belarus, we had this incredible spike of VPN usage. So people started to download it, started to learn how to use all these censorship circumvention tools, and so on. So that was really interesting. Everybody paid attention to that. And I think here there is also a lot of hope, because if people want that, you just need to find a way to deliver this information to them. That's why it's so important to, again, provide tools, deliver tools of how to avoid censorship in Belarus. Then what's due to these direct threats to journalists, to their freedom, to their safety, at least 300 journalists had to flee the country, including myself. But what's interesting here, major newsrooms relocated, but we never stopped operating. And again, here my colleagues from European Radio for Belarus, who operate from Warsaw, from Poland, can relate to that for sure, because they never stopped working. They lost their, they had to flee the country, but they continued operating immediately from Warsaw. The biggest media outlet, Dubious, which was read by 65% of the population, was completely shut down, banned. They relocated, they went to Kiev, to Ukraine, and they immediately were able to renew operations from scratch. So we are more creative, we are more resilient than the state, and we are able to, we were somehow prepared to this, right? Of course, more support here is needed, and all these major newsrooms need assistance, need support, because, well, they need to operate somehow, and there are always constant needs, right? But this is to show you that we are much stronger than the regime. And we have also this really weird laws and kind of weak justice system that prevents people from speaking out, that really scares people from giving interviews to independent media and so on. We have 300 Telegram channels and media outlets that were announced as extremists. That's this phenomenon in Belarus. It's like New York Times, Washington Post being extremists, the New Yorker, all of them, imagine, the major ones. And people who follow these media, these Telegram channels, can be jailed for that. Imagine you follow somebody on Twitter or on Instagram, and you can be jailed for that because their phones are checked, right? So they go, and then police can come and check their phones, and they can be jailed for that. But what we noticed, despite that extremist law in Belarus, we saw that the readership of our channels, of our media outlets, did not decrease. It's actually increased. So we were like, whoa, what's happening? Because we lost our subscribers. And people, what do people do? So people do not subscribe to us, but they go and still read us, right? Because they remember our handles and so on. So that's that's amazing. That just shows you that people never stopped sort of wanting to get this information. And I wouldn't say that censorship or self-censorship is a problem in Belarus, right? I think the problem is that we don't have enough quality content, and now we really need it. People go to YouTube because it cannot be censored at this stage in Belarus. They want to watch independent information, some YouTubers, some videos, and so on. That's one of the main sources of information, by the way, in Belarus at the moment, YouTube. But they see and watch Russian propaganda there. And because it's Russian language, and that's how they get this. And this is really dangerous. We also need, like these alliances, we need more collaboration between independent journalists and media outlets. We need obviously more resources, we need more tools to avoid censorship and so on. But I would say that what we've been doing for the past 2 years is actually an example and should be inspiring for others as well. And I think now for Russian journalists, that might be also an example how to deal with the situation when independent journalism is being banned in Russia. And maybe I'll just finish now with saying that, again, like for the past 10 years of my experience, I never self-censor my work. Of course, now I'm on the wanted list by the regime, and I have a criminal case, and I cannot come back to my country because they think that I attempted to seize power. But it's worth it because, well, we spread information and we deliver this information to Belarusians on the ground, and it just works.
So are we going to connect with Supriya, or are we connecting with India or not?
Yes, but the problem is that she can hear us from here, so we are trying to.
Okay, I didn't understand that, but okay. Did you understand that?
She cannot hear us.
Oh, she can't hear us.
She can hear the room, yes, sorry.
But she can speak to the room.
Okay, but well, if she can't hear us, then how do I ask her a question?
Exactly, that's why we're trying to solve this problem.
Just let her speak.
Okay.
I think we can type it. Maybe as a Belarusian journalist, I can find a solution, you know.
Well, I mean, basically the question is, tell us about the situation under Narendra Modi and the press situation in India. Oh, we see her now. Okay, good.
Sure. Hello, this is Supriya Nair. I'm speaking from Bombay in India, and I am not sure if you can hear me, but I hope you can. This is a strange performance to be part of in a discussion about censorship and self-censorship. And I wish I could hear you guys. I'm not sure whether I hope you can hear me or not, because this feels strange and sort of cinematic. Hi, thank you very much. Okay, I've heard that you can hear me. I'm deeply sorry not to be hearing my co-panelists. I'll try and keep this short. I think there is a political angle to the discussion because when we talk about censorship and journalism, our primary opponent tends to be the state, right? And it's true that in India over the last few years, there have been some spectacular acts of violence against journalists, acts like the murder of the Kannada journalist Gauri Lankesh, which I know made world headlines, which certainly makes it seem like the increasing centralization and opacity of the political process in India, what is known around the rest of the world as sort of strongman politics, has had a very, very sharp impact on Indian journalism. And I think it's had some visible effects, and certainly it's had a chilling effect. But there is a reason that India drops lower and lower on the World Press Freedom Index every year and was never all that high to begin with. And that's because the social forces in which the journalism tries to untangle in India have always operated with impunity as far as journalists are concerned. And so the picture the world sees tends to be that of, the English language journalist in trouble with the state. And yet the everyday journalist in India experiences, the state's crackdown as humiliation at a police station, something that's made national headlines here just today. It's retaliation from business interests in local small towns. It's sometimes it's families who, powerful families in villages or very, very small cities who run the show and who would prefer that, who would prefer not to hear what journalists have to say. And I think that's one part of the problem to solve. But to me, I also feel passionately about solving a problem that I think we've confronted like never before in the last 10 years, and that's not so much the chilling effect on the media as the effect of distraction. And I do think that the rise of tech platforms in the last 10 years have enabled power structures to very successfully utilize them to make sure that you can put news out and you can put stories out, but how effective they are in reaching their audience becomes more and more of a question mark. And so what I'd like to hear from all of you, if I could hear you, would be your sense of, what to do in the age of the expanded Orwellian maxim, which is not just the news being, something that someone doesn't want printed, but the news being maybe something that no one really wants to read. Thank you. Those are my opening and perhaps my closing remarks. I look forward to seeing what this panel says now or later.
Tell her not to hang up. I'm going to approach each of you with questions, a follow-up question, and I'd like to follow up with Zhao first. And my question is also getting away from censorship per se and talking about sort of the big picture. You described a childhood, a very terrifying childhood during the Cultural Revolution, and China at the time was very poor, and as you rightly noted, China is now quite wealthy. It's the second largest economy, in purchasing power terms, it's maybe the top economy in the world now, and hundreds of millions of Chinese have joined the middle class, so a Western, style standard of living, and for political scientists, development experts, there's always been sort of this, a standard scheme of how societies develop. And once you have a middle class, you're then supposed to start getting demands for rights and for freedoms. And what we see in China is just the opposite. Under President Xi Jinping, it's become more repressive. And I think, I don't know if you date this repression in the media to his assumption of power in 2012, 2013, but that seems to make sense. That he if is not a Maoist, a neo-Maoist of some kind, and that's for a lot of development specialists, that's a strange turn of events, because the assumption was, and this was part of the rationale for integrating China into the global economy and for Chinese accession to the World Trade Organization, that there would simply be peace and progress and development and greater freedom through commerce and economic development and economic growth. And as more people became middle class, you would have this natural development like Europeans overthrew feudalism. And I'm wondering, is this still valid, or are there reasons why China has taken a different path?
Thank you, Jonathan. Let me just use my time with real attitude of humbleness. Why I say this, because English is not my language. Even I speak in my Chinese, I wouldn't know how to describe such a complex situation in any sort of valuable way. I try, okay? I know that everything you say, the opposite almost is truth. Let me start from a few thousand years ago. China had a history of what we call the 春秋战国, the war states time, which is where the Confucius was born, Lao Tzu was born. Today, you heard anything about Chinese civilization, glory or past with that time, which is actually, in terms of thoughts and expressions, and it's preprint, but it's free. Free in the sense of people have all kind of different ideas and different school of thoughts, as much as like ancient Greek was anywhere else. But when Qin dynasty came, the first emperor, the first time that China became unified, a large land, a large part, by war, by force, Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor of China, one of the first things he did was to literally bury scholars, burn books. Ideas are dangerous. Ideology are dangerous. Unless he approves, nothing else should let people to read and think and be taught. That's starting from 2,000 years ago, the first Chinese emperor, and went along for a few thousand years, all the way to Mao Zedong. Mao was supposed to be a communist, but he was not. He's supposed to be a Marxist. He was not really. He's a peasant rebellion successfully, under the particular international context, but he became the last emperor in a sense. His role model is first emperor of China, Qin dynasty. And he literally said in 1960s that I did more than he did to scholars and books. And he said it with a pride. The anti-rightists, the persecution of intellectuals, the propaganda, the censorship, anything you name it, social control. Let me say one more thing about Mao, because he's not just the past. Mao, when he became the dictator, had all power in his later age, meaning 70s or something. He did everything stupid and crazy and insane as possible any human being does, no matter how he was brilliant strategist and politician he was before. He persecuted everyone surrounded him, his friends, his colleagues. He persecuted the entire population. When a dictator has absolute power getting too long, he goes crazy. He does worse things in other countries too, and today we see in Russia. This is what I learned. Okay, let me come back to your question.
And maybe we also see it in Belarus, where Lukashenko has been in power for 28 years. So let's follow up on that. Has Lukashenko gotten worse over the years?
Well, yes and no. I think, when I was 14, which was forever ago, I went to this high school and it was shut down, right? So it was like a very famous one. We had this Western-oriented curriculum, and it was really we had professors who were teaching us. And because it was too good, too great, Lukashenko shut it down. And basically, we went underground. So we started, we rented apartments. We started in these, houses because we did not have a venue. The building was given away from us. And I never officially finished any kind of school in Belarus, right? Which is very funny. But So since then, like I was a teenager when I basically, how to say, розовые очки, right? When these pink glasses, like I lost them, right? So I was never naive about Lukashenko. And I remember there were different moments, like when these circles of repressions were higher, were lower, you know, there was some sort of, people were talking about liberalization in Belarus, and people had so many hopes. And of course, sometimes it was less dangerous to be in Belarus, sometimes it was more dangerous, but I don't think that it was because he was more kind or more, I don't know, liberal or more pro-democratic or whatever. That was because he did not feel a threat. And when in 2020 he felt threatened, he felt that the majority of the population is against him and that he is losing grounds. And that was maybe one of the very few moments when he, that was definitely the most dangerous moment for him since his entire rule. And that's why, firstly, he got traumatized by that. He keeps reminding about 2020, about that revolution, about these people who dared to rise up against him. But also he's full of revenge. Now he understands that he would not survive another wave of protests. That's why he basically destroyed the entire civil society in Belarus. It exists abroad, so it's kind of, we are more or less fine, but we cannot operate from inside the country. It's very difficult. The same with media, right? Because he now sees the power of information and he's really scared of that. But what's interesting, despite these repressions and despite this absolutely totalitarian state that exists right now in Belarus, right? And we should bear this in mind, there is a total ban on street activities. There is a total ban on any activity because it's dangerous, because people, according to the regime in Belarus, people cannot gather, cannot unite, cannot exchange information, cannot exchange their opinions, because it's dangerous, right? But despite that, what we have seen in the past, since Russia launched the war against Ukraine, we have seen people, eyewitnesses, who sent us information from the ground about the movement of Russian troops in Belarus, and we receive thousands of messages every day from people inside the country who send us this information. And whenever people tell me that nothing is happening in Belarus, you guys just gave up, well, this is not true. And I speak to these people, and I know that they are still against Lukashenko because this is not over. Like they did not start loving him back, right? And they send us this information. That's how we are able to also inform Ukrainians about these missile strikes, about how movement is happening, where Russian troops are going, and so on. And that's how Ukrainians were able to be ready for attacks and prepare their citizens as well. So this is, again, a very positive example of how people are organized, self-organized, despite repressions, despite this state terror that has happened for the past, 2 years in Belarus, and despite Lukashenko. And I'm still surprised that people are able to do this. This is something that I would like to share with you as well.
Do we still have India on the line? Is she still, okay. She's not here. Okay, well, my question would have been trying to relate what you guys have said with the situation in India. You notice that there's the kind of wave of, in recent years of a sort of a nationalist populism, which has been at odds with liberal democracy, and we saw that this was with Trump in the U.S. and most recently with Orban's overwhelming victory, Viktor Orban's overwhelming victory in Hungary. And my question would have been, and I guess we can all just consider what the answer might be, was whether Modi, who's also been seen as a part of this axis of populist nationalism globally, whether he would leave power willingly should he lose an election. Trump didn't want to. Lukashenko didn't want to. If the population turns on India, would the world's largest democracy suddenly be threatened with collapse? We'll have to find out somewhere else, apparently. And maybe now is the time to take some questions from the audience. I'm going to have to ask you to come up here because we want to record this. And so why don't you come up and just ask your question. You don't have to stand very close to it.
Okay.
You can just speak into the microphone.
Thanks both Hannah and Xiaoqiang for your inspiring work, and also our panelists from India. So I guess I have one question for everyone and also for Xiaoqiang. So personally, I've been a subscriber to the email newsletter of China Digital Times since 2016. And earlier last year, one of my friend's film reviews ended up on your website after it was deleted from social media. And so I always had this question about the methodology of how it is that you can manage to collect so many posts that have been deleted and then reposted and deleted and reposted with a team of around 20 people. So that's always been a curiosity of mine. And a question maybe for everyone. So Xiaoqiang also spoke about this idea of digital totalitarianism. And I'm curious about whether there are any developments, like economic, political, or even technological, that give you hope for being able to spread the truth or speak truth to power, because as we see that those in power use technology to enforce their power, it also gives rise to ways to resist or fight back, like having platforms like China Digital Times, or still being able to reach an audience across borders. Thanks.
Thank you. Let me finish my second half answer to Jonathan's question before. Fast forward from Mao's dictatorship failed miserably, politically and economically. China had to becoming open up the world, and that's the 80s. That's when I was in the college. That's Deng Xiaoping's era. He doesn't want a political openness, but he does give China an economic openness. From there on, past Tiananmen, the tragic event, China had still basically on the track of connection to the world, economically becoming the world factory, and the Chinese middle class rose. Then there are more and more openness in Chinese society, and including the technology helps. Internet in late 1990s bring the new hope of freedom of information. The commercialization of the Chinese media make the Chinese Communist Party has less control to compare relative to Mao's era, that to the media. Then the Chinese media people becoming more and more putting information out, and the more liberal China people has interacted with the world more. China is more and more like the rest part of the world in the past 30, 40 years. Chinese people start to travel, Chinese students like myself studied abroad. Therefore, there is a genuine hope that China also becoming politically modernized, become a democratic society. Not only that's the expectation by the Western world, it's by Chinese people too, because people wants to be freer. This process being turned around when Xi Jinping stepped in power in 1913, not by him individually, it's by the Chinese Communist Party who hold in power, the power holders. Basically, they are the children of the first generation of the Chinese communists. They felt they own the power. They felt they are being threatened. They genuinely felt that the color revolution will happen in other countries, will happen in China as well. So what we are seeing right now is a pushback. Xi Jinping is a very determined leader on behalf of this political clique, the elite cloud, that very determined to do everything using the wealth that accumulated in China by the state and other control apparatus, and including technological infrastructure and new technologies such as big data analysis, artificial intelligence, that to control and suppress Chinese society politically back to the same way, well, not back to the same way, but as much as further back to a autocracy. And Xi Jinping persecuted so many of his political opponents. Not only he wants to stay in the power, he has to stay in the power. He will be killed the day he walked out of the office. Just by his political survival, life survival, physical survival alone, he needs to stay in the power indefinitely. Okay? So we're facing an economically powerful China a politically holding on the power of the autocracy China, a dictator who determined has no other option but stay on power indefinitely, and a technically becoming more and more developed, what I call digital authoritarianism or totalitarianism, you name it, providing more technology, infrastructure, and method to control and manipulate the population and has impact around the world. This is what we're facing. So it's a middle class having more and more awareness of democracy, right? Yes. Do they have enough power in society? No. The political power and the resources far beyond of that. I resonate with Hannah to say in those societies, in any society, there is a resistant force that people want the freedom and people want to fight back. But also I have to say, when the resources are on the oppressor side, when those power elites has so much determination and resources, we're facing a huge battle and a very long haul until we see the sense of freedom in China. Finally, how the China Digital Times, my website, can follow the Chinese internet and get the uncensored voices, not by 20 people, not by 2 people, not by 200 people. Chinese censor has hundreds of thousands of people monitoring Chinese internet every day, everywhere, and deleting them. Chinese censor monitoring the Chinese internet. Chinese internet users, we're talking about 800 million above. No one really want to be censored. Okay? If their content being censored, there's someone will speak out, someone will repost, there's someone will curse, there's someone will do something about it. And let's just say my project is based on this crowdsourcing of the Chinese resistance digitally online by the Chinese netizens themselves. This is the same as Hannah saying, the people in Belarus, despite of the censorship, they do push back, they do resist.
I think we have time for one more question. If somebody would like to, are you leaving or are you coming up here? Okay, you'll have to come up.
I was wondering if in Belarus, the independent media has managed to sort of become the mainstream predominant media. Why is it that Lukashenko is not able to control it the way that it is possible in China? And parallelly, in China, why are we seeing a rise in independent media in a similar manner? Or is there control sort of preventing it?
And I'll just remind both of the panelists who are here that we have 5 minutes to clear the room. So, briefly.
So, so regarding the popularity of independent media in Belarus, right? So why in 2020 we basically got we were the mainstream. We got the majority of the population. Most of the people were reading us and were getting information from independent media and bloggers, not from pro-regimes media. Well, it was also the pandemic, right? And the regime in Belarus lied, as you might remember. Lukashenko said that vodka and tractors would save you from the pandemic, and then people saw that their friends, their colleagues were dying, and they wanted to get information why. So that's how they turned to bloggers, to Telegram, to independent media to get this information, and they got it, and they trusted us, right? Because, well, we delivered this information to them. And it also continued throughout the political campaign, throughout the elections, throughout the protests, right? And at some point we had, Telegram was so popular that like millions of people were subscribed to Telegram channels, because it was also the issue of their security, because they needed to know what was happening on the streets of their country, and we did not have any other platforms that were operating, right, because of the internet shutdown. What also technology helped us achieve? We were able to create platforms for communication, to exchange opinions, to exchange why people were dissatisfied with Lukashenko, and there were obviously a number of reasons, and that's where people were able to express themselves and also see how many of them were against Lukashenko, right? What the regime has been trying to show for so many years, that the opposition, the dissent, is the minority. And it was actually what 2020 changed and why this revolution was so successful, and it still continues. Because people understood that they are the majority. It was this snowball mobilization when people, saw that, there are these people in regions protest, right? Not only in the capital, not only in Minsk, like all over the country, and more people would join because they wanted to be part of that movement. All of a sudden, they understood that they are not alone. So, of course, now the regime blocks everything, right? Telegram, independent media, and so on. But once you felt free, it's very difficult for you to come back, under the carpet and hide and kind of forget the experience you had, also because you know that you are still the majority, which is against. The regime is able to control the population either because it's supported or because of repressions, right? There are repressions in Belarus, but the regime also understands that they are not supported by the people. And I would say that, of course, it has resources to control the population, but such a dictatorship as in Belarus is not sustainable, or maybe less sustainable than in China for sure. So that's why I'm more optimistic. That's why it gives me a lot of hope, because for how long can you maintain the level of repressions, which is also very expensive?
You have the final word, Zhao.
I want Hannah to have a final word because Hannah is younger. But I do want to say that Tiananmen was a hope 33 years ago, was a hope of Chinese generation that it used to. That it wants the freedom and being under the bloodshed and crackdown. Even the Eastern Europe and former Soviet Union later on collapsed. When internet came to China, I found a new hope. The Chinese people found a new hope. That freedom of information, freedom expression, that with new technology facilitate, people can have voices and can be independent voices. These are all true. And that's how I started this China Internet Media project from overseas. But this new hope, I keep on using the word new hope because remember the trilogy of Star Wars? The second episode is called The Emperor Strikes Back, and that is 2013, Xi Jinping is the Emperor Strike Back. I know that's what I've seen until now. Unfortunately, the third episode in China is not Return of Jedi right now. It's called The Emperor Got AI. And I'm serious. And this is really dangerous. We do not foresee this. We do not foresee the technology, digital technology promised the new hope. Actually, at this moment, right now, the artificial intelligence, big data, in favor of the controllers, in favor of large company and state, in favor of the manipulation and surveillance. And that's what we're facing in terms of particularly China, the state power who has no boundaries to overpass, control the private media and getting people information and privacy, especially the pandemic control now. Chinese people's every digital information in the trace is in the state hand, and that can turn into a political control indefinitely. So let me finish this. We do have a hope. The hope is the young generation. Thank you.
On that hopeful yet sobering note, I'd like to thank the panelists, Hannah and Zhao, for being here, and Supriya in the ether, wherever she is. And thank you for coming and listening.